Hey y'all, welcome to this month's episode of Gettin Lit, a monthly podcast dedicated to diverse reads coming out for the month. Today, we're going to be talking about all the diverse books coming out in March. My name is Lala, and you can find me on Instagram at ThisBlackGirlReads. And on today's show, we'll discuss the highly anticipated sequel to The Coldest Winter Ever by Sista Souljah. We'll also talk about the satisfying poetry collection by an amazing spoken word artist. We'll look at a groundbreaking YA thriller about an Indigenous teen. We'll discuss a memoir that has been on my radar since last year by a world champion Canadian hurdler. And we'll take a look at two different books that take us to Afghanistan, Cuba, and Miami and deal with immigration and family. So, are you ready to get lit? So before we get lit today, I want to say thank you to all of you guys who listened to the first two episodes. They now have over 200 downloads. So thank you. And please continue to listen and share it and leave your comments and reviews. It is so appreciated. So now let's get lit. So the first book that you should be putting on your list that is coming out in March is The Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. So Angeline Boulley is a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians, and essentially she's a storyteller. And she writes about her Ojibwe community in the Michigan Upper Peninsula. So she has many achievements. She even used to be the director of the Office of Indian Education at the U.S. Department of Education. And she has so many achievements and she speaks for her community and she is awesome. But this is her first novel and it is a gut punch. But I'm telling you, it's definitely worth it. So this one follows a teen and her name is Donis. And Donis is essentially trying to balance her two communities. She's part of the Sault Ste. Marie community, and her father is an Anishinaabe firekeeper. And then he has the other side of her family, the Fontaines, and they are kind of white, upper class, and wealthy. So she has a really big plans for her future, and she wants to become a doctor. But when her maternal grandmother has a stroke, she decides that she's going to defer college for a little bit to help take care of her. So she spends her free time playing hockey with her firekeeper half-brother Levi, but then tragedy strikes and she discovers that someone is selling a dangerous new form of meth and people are dying from it. So she decides that she's going to try to figure out who's behind all of this, who is selling it, who is killing people in her community. And by doing this, she wants to hide it from her family. She doesn't want them to know that she's doing like this dangerous thing. She doesn't want them to know that she's involved in trying to find out who's behind all of this. So she goes on this journey, and while on the journey of trying to solve the mystery, we learn a lot about her Indigenous community. There's also quite a little bit violence, especially state violence, and quite a bit of racism, domestic violence, sexual violence, and violence against women. So that's a trigger warning. There is a little bit of that in the book. But the book does a great job of balancing the darkness with the beauty of the Ojibwe culture. We see a lot of culture and customs, which I really appreciated because I think that I learned a lot that I didn't know about the community through this book. The characters themselves, they were so well crafted. Donis is fully realistic. She's an imperfect girl, just trying to handle the things that are happening around her and the things that get thrown at her. I like the way that it is a first-person narrative, so that way we get to kind of hear her internal monologue and allowing us to get to learn what's going on in her head as she encounters like anti-Indian bias and deals with grief and all of that. So I totally love this book. It was powerful and I learned so much. So this one's called Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley, and it comes out on March 16th. Next, we're going to talk about poetry. And if you know anything about me, you know that I am a sucker for poetry. I love great poetry collections. So this one is called Black Girl Call Home by Jasmine Mann. So this is a gorgeous, gorgeous poetry collection by spoken word artist Jasmine Mann, and I just loved it. So Mann writes this collection to call herself home, but it's also kind of a love letter to any Black girl that is wandering. So there's so many things that I love about this collection. So Mann explores the complexities of race, of feminism, of Black hair, of motherhood, and I appreciated the angle that she took. I appreciated the diction and the punch of each poem. They stood very well together, trying to get that narrative of calling us home and get that narrative that she wanted going. So they worked really, really well together. But I think that what I loved is that they also worked very well apart. They stood on their own, and each different poem carried its own weight. I loved that the poems ranged in form from lists to lyric and language, but they were all kind of unified by posing the social political questions through the author's personal narrative. So she used her narrative as the small thing, and then she expanded. And I really love that. Some of my favorite pieces in this collection were The Light, Sandra's Haiku, Missing Girls, and The Little Mermaid. And I truly feel like the collection has a little bit of something for everyone and does a great, great job of highlighting the Black experience, and particularly the Black woman experience, giving historical context, which I truly, truly appreciated as well. I think that Mann's poetry is powerful, it's poignant, it's vivid, it's emotional, and most of all, I think that it's really timely. It's such a great collection to dive into, and this one is called Black Girl Call Home by Jasmine Mann, and it comes out on March 9th. The next book that we're talking about today, I absolutely love this book. So this one is called Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi. And when I read this book, I was totally engrossed in it. And I instantly thought this would be such a great book for a book club because it has so many layers. It has so much to discuss. I really love this book. So the first part of Sparks Like Stars takes place in Kabul in 1978. And Satara Zalmani is a 10-year-old girl. She's smart. She's curious. She lives a very, very privileged life. So her father was one of the prominent advisors to Sardar Dawood, Afghanistan's progressive president. And so Satara lives with her mom, her dad, and her brother. And her family spends a lot of time at the castle because of Satara's father's position. So life for her is very good. Like, she's very privileged and she lives that privileged life. And all of that changes in the course of one night. So the communists stage a coup and multiple assassinations occur. The president was killed, members of his inner circle are killed, and as well as Satara's entire family are killed, and she's the only survivor from the brutal massacre. So Shair, who is one of the castle guards, smuggles Satara out of the castle, and he's able to find refuge for her with an American diplomat. So Satara witnesses the assassination of her family, and she believes that Shair helped kill her family in some way. So that's where that part ends. Satara then becomes Ariana Shepherd, and she is taken in by the diplomat. She has a life. That's a beautiful part of the story that I don't want to give away. But then she becomes Ariana Shepherd, and the book skips ahead 40 years, where Ariana, now an accomplished surgeon, lives in Queens, and she works in a hospital in New York City. Her patients had cancer, and one day, a much older version of the guard that saved her all those years ago shows up at her clinic. So Ariana still believes that Shair could have played a part in killing her family. So when Ariana recognizes Shair, all of the old bottled-up feelings from long ago surfaces. And Ariana is determined to get Shair to admit to his part in her family's killing. She needed Shair to tell her where her family was buried so that she can finally give them like the burial that they deserve. And her desire to get answers to what actually happened is awakened. So she decides that she's going to go back to Kabul to get the answers that she's been missing all these years. So I just love this book so much. There are so many elements of it that just captivated me. It reads sort of like a memoir, but in fact, it's just a beautiful piece of historical fiction. The imagery captures the essence of like Afghanistan before and after the communist coup. And I could so vividly picture the streets, the people, the shops, the soldiers, the gardens, and everything that occurred within the walls of the castle. I think the book was very, very well researched, and it felt so genuine and authentic. So this one is called Sparks Like Stars by Nadia Hashimi, and it comes out on March 2nd. So the next book on my list for today is My Mother's Daughter, a memoir of struggle and triumph by Perdita, Felicien. So this is the only book on this episode that I haven't read completely, but I still wanted to talk about it because it is on my list of the most anticipated books of 2021. I cannot wait to read the whole thing. I read a preview and I really loved it. And for me, I've always been intrigued by Felicien's story of triumph. Maybe it's because, I am also the daughter of immigrants from the Caribbean, so I felt that connection. So this is a memoir of one of Canada's top athletes, two-time Olympian and world championship hurdler, Perdita Felicien. So her mother, Catherine, came to Canada from St. Lucia in 1974 to be a nanny. After only a few years in Canada, she finds herself pregnant again for the third time with no relatives or support in this new country. So together, her and her daughter in the years to come would experience racism, domestic abuse, even homelessness. But Catherine's will would always help pull them through. So this book tells the story of their life together, the power of Perdita's talent, and the strength of her mother's love and encouragement. So I cannot wait to read this one. This one is called My Mother's Daughter, a memoir of struggle and triumph by Perdita Felicien, and it comes out on March 30th. The next book we're talking about today is Life After Death by Sista Souljah. I'm talking about this book today on the show because so many people have been asking me about this book. I talk about this book so much, about what I think it's going to be like and all of that. I think I'm a part of like maybe 3 or 4 groups that are going to discuss the book. But before I talk about this book, I want to first speak about The Coldest Winter, which is an urban fiction classic. I think it's the first book that I truly fell in love with, right? When I was like maybe 18 or 19. And I remember just being in love with the book and wondering when I would get to see what happened to Winter. So fast forward about 20 years and Sista Souljah finally is giving us what we've been asking for. So when I received this book, I was so excited. At the time, I remember I was reading something else and I said, sometimes I do read 2 books like together at the same time, but I said, no, I want to read this by itself. I want to give it focus. Like I wanted to really get into it. So I waited. I remember I got it like right before Christmas. I waited till the week after Christmas so that I would have a couple days to read it. And so I started reading the book and I realized about 30 pages in that I really didn't like it. But I knew that I had to stick with it. Like I was determined to stick with the story. I needed to know what happened. Like I was determined, right? So I get halfway through the book and I just abandoned it. Like I couldn't finish it. I walked away from it and I didn't pick it up again until probably the beginning of February when I realized that I had to record this podcast and I didn't finish the entire book. So I don't want to talk too much about the plot because I feel like if I talk about the plot, I will give it away and I don't want to wreck it for anybody. My review is just based on my opinion, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't read it. If you had planned to read it, just read it. You might have a different opinion. I've talked to a couple other bloggers that have read the book, and a couple of them really like it. I'm just not one of those people. I just felt like it was a totally different story. Like nothing is the same. All of the characters are different except for obviously Winter. And Winter is like Winter to the 10th power. She is Winter on steroids. She's a lot. So I feel like I really tried to love this book and I really wanted to, but I just found it very difficult to digest. And I feel like the author maybe blindsided us as readers a little bit. Maybe that was her plan. Like maybe I'm not looking at it from, I guess, her perspective. I'm not seeing it the way other people might see it, but maybe that was her goal, to really blindside and shock us, right? I think that maybe if she had released this as just a book, not the sequel, I might have felt different. I don't know. But I feel like this book just did not do anything for me. I didn't enjoy it. But if you were planning to read this book, I think that you should. Maybe your opinion is different and maybe we can have a discussion at the end of the day and you can tell me, you know what, Lala, you need to think of it like this, or you need to think of it like this. Like, I'm really curious to hear what everybody else has to say about this book. So that's all I'm going to say. Please read this if you had plans to read it. Read it, read it, read it. So it comes out on March 2nd, and it is a sequel to The Coldest Winter Ever, and it's called Life After Death by Sista Souljah. So last but not least, the final book that we're going to talk about today is called Of Women and Salt by Gabriela, Garcia. So I don't even know where to begin with this book. It was just totally engrossing, and it was on my list of must-reads for 2021 as well. So this one takes a look at 5 generations of women in Cuba, Mexico, and Miami. A current-day ICE deportation in Miami kicks off the story. So while dealing with addiction, Jeanette tries a neighbor's child who has been left behind when ICE detains the mother. She is also learning a lot about her Cuban family history, while her mother, Carmen, is determined not to talk about it. So she wants to learn more about her history, and her mom is just burying the stories, right? So I think this novel is essentially about choices, immigration and motherhood, moving from 19th century Cuba to 21st century Miami. And we get to see, like, in 1866 in Cuba, Maria is the only woman working in this cigar factory and war is coming. And in Miami in 2016, we get to see Carmen, a first generation Cuban immigrant, and her daughter, Jeanette, who is trying to stay sober. We get to see their story as well. So the book is told in the form of loosely connected chapters that read kind of like snapshots on each person's life. So it touches on Cuban history, immigrants in the US, and it kind of follows the matriarchal lineage. I think I have a thing for generational stories. That's probably why I was so engrossed in this one. We see these 5 generations of immigrant women who are struggling ever since they were displaced. And the story has multiple narrators who are telling their own stories, but at the same time, they are commenting on the people who are related to them. Something that really stuck out to me was a line from one of Anna's chapters. She says, "Sometimes she too cried, thinking about all the other possible lives if X or Y had happened instead of Z." And I just love that because it's just a perfect way to sum up each relationship in this book. If this happened, then this wouldn't have happened. If this happened, then this wouldn't have happened. And looking at it like that, I think it's so interesting. So I think this is a beautiful book, and the way the author tells this story makes it even better. I just love this one. So this is called Of Women and Salt by Gabriela Garcia, and it comes out on March 30th. And that's it for our show today. Thank you guys so much for listening to the Gettin Lit podcast. I am Lala, and you can find me on Instagram at ThisBlackGirlReads. Do not forget to jump over to Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts and hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to leave a rating and review to get the podcast in front of more eyes. It's so much appreciated, guys. And I'm so happy to announce that we are now finally on Spotify, so you can subscribe there as well. I would love to know what you guys are reading next, and if you pick up any of these books. Remember, all the links to the books are in the show notes. And I hope that I talked about a book or brought a book to your attention that you are eager to read or that you put on your list. Thank you so much for getting lit with me today, guys. And remember, if you're reading what everyone else is reading, then you'll probably think the way everyone else is thinking.